community forests, it's a working example of where we've come together. You show me something else where we're directly managing forest tenures together with sharing values. An important part of it too is, man, we have to live with the consequences of our decisions, right? And they're in everybody's face. So you cannot run. This is not in the back 40 where you forgot to pull that log out of a creek and someone sees it. This is right in everybody's face. We absolutely have to live with the consequences. And that's inspiring to manage the forest in ways to improve ecology, economic, social well-being, hydrology. That's really the first point. How can we improve this before we go in?
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Today's episode is all about community forests, something that I think we've been tiptoeing around a little bit in the odd episode here and there, kind of dodging into the concept of more public involvement, public engagement, more including more values and that kind of thing into forest management. And this conversation is a really cool one. It's an excellent example of how we can do those things. So I spoke with the general manager of Wells Grey Community Forest in British Columbia. His name is George Brcko. Now, he is a very passionate and very involved fella that is really trying to do some incredible stuff at Wells Grey. And the whole community is trying to do some pretty interesting stuff. What makes them different is that their community forest is owned by the citizens of Clearwater, the citizens of the town nearby, where I think that changes the dynamic. It changes the way that the community forest interacts with the community and where the extra funds go. All their excess revenue goes straight back into the community in services and stuff for schools and all kinds of different things. And it's just a really cool way for forest management to interact with the community and really become a solution for not just forest management issues, but for societal issues and cultural issues and community issues that are deeper and more ingrained, which is, I think, ultimately what forest management can do. It has the ability to solve a lot of the problems we have in our society, and it just needs to be done in a thoughtful, meaningful, and purposeful way, which I think community forests are proving can be done. So I hope you guys like this conversation all about Wells Grey Community Forest and the cool stuff that they're up to. Really, really, really neat. This podcast is supported by West Fraser. West Fraser is the number one supporter of this podcast for 2021, and they have been for a while. They could not thank them enough for their support because it just lets me do what I want the way I want to do it. So thank you, West Fraser, for all of your help over the years. Thank you. And Greenlink Forestry is also a sponsor. They've been with me since the beginning. Again, could not do this without them. Thank you, Greenlink Forestry. Damage Timber is the final sponsor. They are a company out of Edmonton, Alberta, selling damaged timber you can put in your kitchen. Now, if you want to know what the heck that is, go to damagetimber.com and put in your forest 10 at checkout if you want 10% off. And check them out. They're awesome. Really cool stuff. I love it. All right. Without any further messing around, let's dive into this conversation all about community forests and the future of forest management. Here we go. I want to start off just getting to know you a little bit, getting to know your passion, your motivation, why and how did you get into forestry and why do you keep doing it?
Okay. So, originally my passion for forestry, started back east. I'm a technician that took training in Lindsay, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Here I am using hums and so's already here, man. Sorry.
No. This is how people talk. It's all good.
It's like collect your thoughts, right? So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So it was an interest from boyhood, growing up partially on a farm with a woodlot tree farm next to the farm. Always looking in there and watching trees grow, and misconceptions, thinking that British Columbia grows trees in a straight line, right? So interesting to come out here and to realize the breadth and scope of forestry and forested ecosystems out here, how complex they are, how many things work together. Definitely a misconception coming from back east, where you sort of see tree farming in rows, red pine, white pine in rows. So you really open your eyes when you come out here. And that was the idea. I knew there was a large world out there, and British Columbia really led forestry in many novels and in many pictures and little snippets on the TV that you get to see. Wow, isn't that incredible? What an amazing province, right? With the terrain and the various, landscapes that we work in and practice forestry at. So way beyond, what I was envisioning as a student in Ontario. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So why do you keep doing it? What is it that makes it worthy of your time, worthy of your life?
Yeah. Forestry it's an incredibly complex career. It ties to the natural world, to natural spirituality, I think. So there's a personal drive there, that interest in forestry, and really the real passion has come about when I connected into the community forest world. Really seeing how benefits can go to small communities, how we can slow down and manage our landscapes and our ecology a lot slower than, let's say, industry does. So it's a sort of a stop point, if you will. It's a smaller tenure. It can grow itself in many directions based on the relationships with communities and Indigenous people. So really, community forest has really sparked my interest and really held my interest in the last 15 years as a very practical tenure. As we see a lot of things coming apart around us, the large model may not work for the future, but I really have a lot of passion and care about where community forest can go and is going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's sort of the intersection of education and Indigenous knowledge and science coming togetger, where it can really play out in a small role, right? In a farm, as I always say, taking the large tenure and boiling it down to a little farm where you can really do your work properly, right?
High focus, yeah, for sure. I see it the same way, right? I think we're kind of at this nexus point in time with forest management and as a society, that we're looking for new, innovative, and maybe more collaborative ways to do forest management, because we are seeing that this individual resource focus approach, managing for timber, managing for oil and gas, managing for recreation, for First Nations, all independently, is just coming up with too many conflicts and too many problems. And there's so many lost opportunities for collaboration. And I think this is where this has naturally brought me to this idea of having somebody on that's highly involved with a community forest and discussing that collaboration and discussing how all of those values can come together at the same time, and maybe not see as much conflict as people may suspect there would be if we were to try to do it at a landscape scale, right? So before we get into all that, why don't we just start with the basics? What is a community forest? Can you break it down for me? What is Wells Gray Community Forest? How did it become to be?
Okay, so we community forests are small tenures held by communities, First Nations, collaborative First Nations, small communities. There's over 100 rural and Indigenous communities across British Columbia now represented in the Community Forest Association. So it's really a network of people that sort of share the same vision of diverse community forest initiatives where local people are practicing responsible forest management in perpetuity, of course, right? Mm-hmm. Really being very realistic about annual allowable cuts and the rate that we remove forests and reforestate. So as a result, we are allowed to use our profits to go back into our communities to support healthy and vibrant communities and economies. And there's a massive number of ways that has done through even simple as granting to actually working together, recreation users, ranchers, trappers, other values on the landscape, really working together at the table to come up with solutions. We don't go as fast as industry does. We only take 3 or 4 cut blocks a year, so we're able to plan and go slower, right?
Okay.
So it's important to remember First Nations hold almost half of it's either cooperation or collaboration, some sort of business arrangement with First Nations and communities managing community tenures, forest tenures.
Okay.
So really, to me, it's an intersection of where we want to go in the future with managing our landscape with First Nations values and the intersection of sort of science and spirituality in some ways, right?
Absolutely.
So to me, it's like a very realistic working example of that happening, right? With our various communities, and you could even say it's part of reconciliation, right? So.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot of fear at the the forest management area level, like the big landscape level, that the co-management thing would be impossible to do and turn a profit and actually survive as a business. And I think that's what stops it from happening, because you have these two different cultures and they haven't collaborated well together in the past. So why should we expect that a more integrated collaboration should turn out better? And so I think people are afraid of it. But like you said, this community forest approach, although it's not a profit-driven approach, it serves, I think, as a really excellent template for how to begin and what's possible as far as improving all values at the same time while also turning a profit.
That's right. Right. That's the core of community forests. It's about local control over local resources, enjoying the monetary and non-monetary benefits offered by those local resources that we manage. Right.
Yeah.
And saving room for each other. Timber is not the first objective.
Yeah. Like I listened to on the Wells Gray Community Forest website. You have that little 13-minute documentary that I thought was cool, really well done. It kind of explained. I think it did a great job explaining the values of Wells Gray and kind of how well you guys have done collaboration and how well it's worked out. And I think it's kind of the epitome of what we want to do at the forest scale, right? It's just trying to scale that up. And I found it just, I guess one thing I took away from it was you said it's not a profit based, like we're not concerned solely about profit. The way I've kind of worded it is, I think this is how forestry should be done, is that it should be landscape management paid for by timber production, right? Like use the profit to manage the landscape, not manage the landscape to turn a profit.
That's right. So you hit it dead on there. We've used our profits generated through sustainable logging to put money back into studies within our own community forest, as in establishing permanent sample plots was one of the projects to really drill down if we are actually have the right sustainable cut level. So again, trying to create, use our information to create our own cut control, and being extremely careful with that. So that project, we looked at how fast is our wood growing according to the British Columbia site index curves. Mm-hmm. Are we doing it differently? And it turned out we were. We were growing faster there in those ecotypes. So exactly what you're saying, reinvesting our surplus profits back into studying the community forest, doing watershed studies, sustainable management plans for watershed before we begin cutting, and following that as we go through. Absolutely putting money back into using fertilizer tea bags at the time of planting. Above and beyond sort of basic silviculture, but incredible for trees to be, have that little extra boost, if you will, in poor sites. So those are the kind of things my board of directors supports, reinvesting and growing really for the future, right? That's
cool. And if I'm truly fair, forest management at the large scale they do a lot of that as well, right? Like they reinvest a lot of their money back into research and sustainability and watershed values and recreation and habitat, and they do all of that. But I think they do the permanent sample plots, and they're constantly reassessing their timber growth or their wood growth or wood stock, right? But I think where community forests do such an incredibly better job is not managing those other values as constraints, but manage them as co-values, right? I think that is where it's almost just it's a mindset shift, right? I don't think that maybe the day-to-day activities wouldn't change that much, but the planning level might change, and the discussions, the pre-planning stuff would change a lot, and you might just do slightly different things that would drastically support those other values that you otherwise a forest company doesn't have the knowledge to know they should do, right? And so it's that collaboration aspect that gets me super pumped about community forests. So I want to get into that, right? So first of all, I guess, who's all involved in the community forest? Who's responsible for it? What are the groups? What are the individuals? How does that work? Who's the owner?
Okay. Well, you're talking with Wells Gray Community Forest here. So we're one of 63 different community forests. So many of them are managed differently. Most of them are, let's say, the district of. So Logan Lake, the community forest belongs to the district of Logan Lake.
Gotcha.
There's many community forests that are held by the districts that they're within.
Okay.
Our community forest is completely different. We're held by the citizens of Clearwater. We are not tied to the District of Clearwater. Yes, we do have working groups, and they hold positions on our board of directors or society. Really, our structure is made up of local people. Truly, they are not influenced by politics locally. So they're citizens of Clearwater that got together probably back in 2003, saw the community forest movement happening and realized that obviously their community could benefit amazing from all aspects of community forest. So they tried to get a community forest, and that's usually offered by the minister.
Okay.
Through a series of studies, available timber, that type of thing. Is it viable for a community forest to exist there? So really proving that out. Nowadays, it's essential to have a First Nations partnership for new community forests.
Right.
We weren't held to that. We have a position on our board of directors that's held by our local First Nations band, SINT, and they are represented on that board and have a say in every decision we make. So there is collaboration there. So there's representatives from public at large, District of Clearwater, TNRD, just the major groups within our community.
What's TNRD?
Thompson Nicola Regional District. So sort of the larger body over Clearwater, if you will.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I saw there was like outdoor club was a part of it, and there was some other.
So those are the stakeholders that I work with. So we could go there and talk about the recreation planning, business
I just
within
wanna, Sorry, yeah, I just want like a breakdown of who has a say, right? Because I think a clear picture of, because normally if a forest management plan, you have the forest professionals, they go out and they do a little public consultation and they make their plan regarding all the values that they think exist on the landscape. But this is not that. This is like, you're a forest professional, so you're involved. So you do a lot of that, the specifics around harvesting and timber supply and stuff. But then who else is at the table that has an equal say towards what happens with this forest? So you said the district, but then the citizens. So you have a bunch of board members that are just citizens in the community, and then you have these other organizations that are also a part of it, right? So who are they?
So they don't really sit at the table with us, though. What I do is go and meet them and bring them the forest planning piece, and then collaborate at that level, if you will.
I see. Okay.
So there isn't a whole bunch of people sitting around the same table. There is representative of the community. We sort of key in on those values that will be affected by our forest operations, and then go directly to those groups and talk to them, modify plans, really drill down to the site plan level. What's this cut going to do to your trail? What's this cut going to do to your access? And come up with alternative ways of meeting what is valuable to them and what's obviously for our operations. So the recreation is a great example.
Yeah, it seems that way. Like watching that documentary that you guys had, it was like I mentioned before. It seems like it's the small, little detailed things. Like the outdoor group representative was talking about how when we build our bike trails, we build them on the edge or within new cut blocks or on the edge of planned cut blocks, and we're discussing harvesting with the Wells Gray Community Forest so that they know that wherever they build it, neither one of those values are going to be in conflict with one another because you've discussed it beforehand. And all it requires is a little bit of foreplanning, right? It's not like it changed everything. You just needed to have a discussion about it. And it just seemed, it's so simple. We're so far away in a lot of places with creating that simple collaboration.
Yeah. So to me, that is a workable size tenure. So I have the capacity to go out in the woods with those guys and actually look at what we're talking about in the trail, not just fire maps back and forth. Mm-hmm. It's to go and spend the time and to look at both of our sets of values, right? So yes, we're trying to locate those trails along the edge of old blocks. In case if I'm logging the piece next to it, it won't be disturbed. I absolutely know where those trails are. It's a formal group. They have planning around it. They see the value in that too, being upfront with us, and then trying to come together in the woods and really hanging ribbing together. So to me, that is the big difference, right? You have a manager who's capable or has the time, is not managing too large of a land base. It's out of control to actually go and meet people in the woods, hang ribbon, discuss what values they're talking about, support them. We supplied the outdoor club while they were constructing mountain bike trails with pipes. We wanted to make sure they were draining and following correct hydrology principles. So therefore we supply them with that so they're successful.
That's awesome.
It's challenging in a recreation area that is on the edge of a climate change band. We are seeing blowdown and beetle in there. It's challenging for the future. Neat thing we're doing this year, though, we have students from UBC coming, and we're going to create a portfolio around the trails. I'm using that as a study area with them. It's on the forefront of climate change, recreation values, and timber. So really the question I'm asking is, will there be opportunities for timber in the future with these other values being higher?
Right.
So it's us fitting in with them.
Yeah. I love that though. Yeah. That's great.
And really trying to work that out together. We had guys from the recreation, folks from the recreation world state that we are a valuable player. They receive funding from us, from our surplus dollars. that they put back into the trails. They're supported by the community forest, which has created profits from literally the wood in their trail network. So they understand where that meets, right? Where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool relationship to have. Not everybody likes logging. You can put whatever hat you want on it. Community forest, woodlot, small tenures, I think have a better chance of working integratedly with the public in the various initiatives that each sort of group has, right? And that can go with the horseback riders in the same trail network, the hikers. There's geocaches in there. So we support a lot of pieces in there. We are about to move into sort of working with the recreation club to start doing some educational signage in the area. Why is this way? What are we doing here? Why did you guys cut this? Why did you stump this? Why are we fuel managing these layers within the recreation tenure as well? So a whole bunch of really good stuff coming up here. And really trying to draw those people in more than we have been.
It's an incredible accomplishment, really. Like, I applaud you guys for accomplishing what you have, because on every time I think about it, it just all makes sense, right? It's just a continuous loop that everything is feeding everything, and everyone is being supported, and even just as a social license to operate kind of thing, or just social acceptance of forest management, of logging, right? I can't imagine that you have a big opposition. I'm sure there's always going to be people that believe what they believe, and that's okay. But I can't imagine that you have a large vocal opposition towards logging in a community where all the profits are going back to community building and education and opportunities and recreation and all this kind of stuff. Like, they're directly seeing the benefits of this, and they're also seeing the collaborative nature with which it's being done. Right.
That's right.
I got to imagine that the public acceptance of it has got to be sky high compared to, like, thinking back, because I know that the community forest started basically because I think it was a Weyerhaeuser mill closed down, right?
Yeah, that's how we were given the opportunity as far as a sort of available tenure that you could, this community could create a community forest with the available tenure as these large tenures are changing hands or sort of being dismantled or redistributed. That was our way in. That was the niche to say to the minister, there is volume here. We can do something different.
Yeah. So have you been there since the community forest started, or did you come in later?
I came in at 2006, literally when we got the license. So there was a 2-year drive before that, 2004 to 2006, trying to get that tenure.
So and maybe if you've talked to people and maybe you've got this information, but what was the public acceptance or the community acceptance like, or perception of forestry when it was just the mill versus the community forest? How has that changed? And what do you think? I mean, is it better? Is it worse? Is it something that you would try to promote at all scales of forest management?
Well, I think there's a spot for us being small tenures, right? Yeah. And managing the local land base around communities and not getting too out of hand with that.
Sure.
Right. So we've generally been given the area around our community, 63 now in British Columbia. So. Okay.
So how much area is that?
So for us, it's 13,000 hectares, roughly.
13,000 hectares. Gotcha.
So, and the most part, community forest, tenure areas were given contentious ground, as in we have 3 watersheds. We have very visual landscapes. They give us the tough stuff to manage. The intersection of public and all these values, they've given us that to manage. We have an appropriate stumpage rate that helps support all of that. So that's extremely important. Yes, it has changed the public's image in my mind. So about 90%, I would say, people in our community support the community forest movement. There are still people that just see it as another way of continuing to cut what's left, right? We were given the guts and feathers, if you will. We were given a board of checkers with half the amount of checkers left. So,
gotcha.
we weren't given a fresh land base. So this is part of the challenge. And I think that is public perception right there. Tenures are trying to change. We're trying to change the face of logging in small communities, but that's still, the hat's still there. We've still logged, us as British Columbia, we still have logged quite a bit of our area. So we're trying to come in differently there and sort of re-educate and bring, as I always say, bring people back into the forest. They think that they're separated from it and industry is the one that controls it. Well, that's not the case, right? So it's really trying to teach people in some ways, and even still doing that in my community 16 years later, of how they can join us and put their thoughts into our planning and education. So
absolutely. Yeah. Again, that collaborative approach, right? That tying in the thing that the forest management has been trying to do for 30, 50 years, which is maybe not 50 because it was sustained yield for quite some time, but now we're supposedly operating under a sustainable forest management system, right? And so we've been in the plan. There's been all these other values besides timber, but I think now these community forests are a real representation of what that co-value management looks like, and it's really heartening to see how well it works when the effort and time are put into it, right? It's just, because I think that's been the misconception, is that like it's too complicated, it's too hard. Like as long as we bring back the trees, everything's fine, and that's served us well to an extent. But we could also do better. We could also be more collaborative, and especially when it comes to stuff like First Nations values and First Nations objectives of what land stewardship looks like. So I think how much discussion or how much, I don't know, collaboration is going on between mills and bigger forest management areas learning from community forests? Is there some cross efforts happening there, or is it still pretty separate?
I think it's still pretty separate. I always have a little bit of a hard time talking about our stories and stuff in front of major licensees. I'm not trying to make us sound better. We're just doing it. We're just doing it differently, right? And
of course,
they're working with a model that really pushes the economics along. We are just trying to slow that down with reduction in cuts and values like old growth management coming online. The industry is going to have to get there fairly quickly, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure, of course.
So we might have some lessons and some structure that they can glean from, or in my mind, if you look at all the tenures in British Columbia, maybe we're the ones doing the social piece, and that's why we exist. The industry can do their job. We're doing ours in a different fashion and really trying to focus on bringing communities back into forestry. So maybe that is our role, and it should be just left to that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So actually, there's a question for you. So does Wells Gray have its own mill? Like, are you guys producing product there, or are you selling your timber to mills, to larger licensees?
Yeah. So at this point, that's what we're doing. We are packaging up an annual harvest package, and it's sold generally to the large mills in the area.
So there you go. That's supporting them at the same time, right?
Absolutely. And right now is an extremely critical time, this November, when the cuts have been impacted by old growth deferral areas. We have a lot of burnt wood on the landscape because of this summer. We're offering green wood here. The industry is jumped right on it. It's a valuable resource to them, being green. Our stumpage rates support the removal of that timber at this point as well. So, really good that way. It's not to say that we haven't provided wood to value-added customers. There's value-added customers that have come forth. We've sold them 2 or 3 loads of logs, what they want. They specifically come to the landing and they can pick that out. There's a timber frame company in Clearwater that does that.
Right.
Now, the mill piece, there are other community forests that have dove right into this. They are using their own logs and sawing them and creating a sales program around that, or they are using those logs, creating timber, creating boards for, let's say, like picnic table programs. So some pretty incredible things. They're employing the First Nations and youth through a job op program. They're using their own wood from their community forest tenure to supply to that little program. They're making picnic tables, and they're putting those picnic tables in the recreation areas in their community. So to me, that's like a full circle. Wells Creek Community Forest, we haven't gotten there yet. We're still doing, if you will, we're still doing really well with our general model of running through any allowable cut and selling to the open market, supporting our local mills at this point.
Well, it seems like a good way to. I think that's a great way to do it, right? So if every First Nations band and every community in the forest tenure areas manages their own immediately adjacent forest for the values that are, because they're going to be different in every community, right? There's going to be different values, different things they want to accomplish. Maybe one has more of a foraging aspect, one is more of a biking aspect, one is more skiing. I don't know. Like there's going to be different values, and if the First Nations are directly involved, they'll have different things they're managing for, right? And I think if you have that system of these community forests managing directly around the communities, and then you have the larger tenure holders managing the quote unquote wilderness areas, or the areas that are, further out of reach, general public's generally not going to get into it, then, and they still have the benefit of receiving some of those raw logs, then like, why not do that? It seems like a better system, and you're going to create more of a public acceptance of all of these values at the same time.
That's right. And community forests can play that education role. You're absolutely right. People see what we do the most because it's around their community. Their visual landscapes are managed by us, their watersheds. Wells Creek Community Forest manages 3 watersheds for the District of Clearwater. They are expecting us to do our job. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The benefits of community forestry vary from community to community. Each community decides how they will manage their local forests through local decision-making, communities that manage their resources, once they've identified their unique values and priorities. So exactly what you say, it is totally different in each community. And they're motivated to make their own investments, right, as well into their long-term tenures. Yeah.
Well, it just makes sense because, like you said, the bigger forest management holders are like they're not going to. The bigger tenure holders, they're not going to have the time and energy and knowledge and connections to manage the area around the community as in depth as you can, right? They just are not going to be able to do it at a profit, not solely, I shouldn't say, but you know what I mean. With the current system that they use, but if they can depend on small tenure holders to do that, then why wouldn't they, right? Like it just seems like, why not? That's a problem they've been having for a very long time. And it's cool to see. So there's over 100 now in BC. How many?
So there's 100 communities represented, and there's about 63 tenures.
Gotcha.
So
it's getting close. So are any of those owned directly by First Nations?
More than half of them are 50% ownership, which is incredible.
That is, okay.
Yeah, awesome. It's really amazing. To me, again, it's a working example of where we've come together. You show me something else where we're directly managing forest tenures together with the sharing values. An important part of it too is, man, we have to live with the consequences of our decisions, right? And they're in everybody's face. So you cannot run. This is not in the back 40 where you forgot to pull that log out of a creek and someone sees it. This is right in everybody's face. We absolutely have to live with the consequences. And that's inspiring to manage the forest in ways to improve ecology, economic, social well-being, hydrology. That's really the first point. How can we improve this before we go in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that, again, it's just a different mindset. right?
It's a different mindset. Yes.
Like the tools, I think the tools as far as the actual practical forest management are the same. You just need a couple extra people at the table to say, hey, maybe avoid this or do this instead, and all of a sudden you've included those values, those non-timber values, as co-values. It seems, right. I mean, and I could sit here and talk about it and say it's easy, but I'm sure it's not easy. I'm sure it's incredibly complex what you do and incredibly challenging at times, but I think it seems to prove that this is possible and doable and economical.
That's right. And really, you see some of the amazing leadership coming out of the tenures that our First Nations community held, where they're incorporating, we're looking at, obviously, fire management as a huge concern for community forests. We're adjacent. We're right in everybody's backyards. So it's a very important part of the equation. And you see the community forests down south putting maximum effort into fuel management and using traditional burn techniques, retreating their areas, reburning their areas that they have fuel managed to sort of hold that landscape in a fashion that is fireproof, guarding and coming up with sort of the same techniques for old growth management. You can't just have an old growth management area just sitting there and not expect wildfire and insects to not have a play in it. So it's really managing those ogmas, those old growth areas from the outside, having proper planning and fire management and whatnot to protect those. So really that comes from the combination of First Nations and community forests coming together, science and traditional. Right. Yeah,
the two different cultures, right? The Western culture and First Nations cultures coming together and collaborating on a scale that everyone is benefiting from. And I think that's what most people want to see, right?
That's right.
It's like, and I think most foresters and forest, when I say foresters, I mean techs as well. So just to be clear, I know some people differentiate, but with forest professionals, I think they all think the same way, right? Like everybody I know that's a forest professional thinks the same way that you and I are talking right now, right? We want to manage for all values forever, period. And it's just the argument about, are we doing that now or do we need to do more, right? And that's where we're having this discussion. And some people believe that we are doing that now. I think most people believe that we can continue to evolve and do better as we have been over time, because we have, right? If we were doing what we were doing in the 50s, we would be getting yelled at a lot more than if we were doing what we're doing right now, right? So
that's right.
There has been progress, but I just get super pumped when I see these opportunities where people take these giant leaps ahead in social action. You know, it's kind of like including that social aspect into forest management that has otherwise been missing, right? That's kind of how I view it, and I think, as forest professionals, for a long time, we've kind of thought that we could operate without that. Like, hey, I love the forest, and I've studied hard to understand what forest dynamics are and how things are related, and I think I can do a pretty good job. But we've failed to recognize other people's values that we otherwise don't hold, and we can't possibly expect ourselves to have all the answers. And this is where including the social aspect, it just pushes us into the next step, into the next stage, into the future, right? It's just, I love it. It's great.
Yeah, and again, I go back to bringing public back into the forest, right? They don't have to feel that they're not part of this management. That some industry is just giving her in the background here and pulling the cutout as fast as possible, which in some aspects might be true. But that's the educational piece. I think the government recognizes that. They want to bring more information back to the public. And there's just so many resources colliding for the last slice of pie that we have to manage everything within. So it's very important.
Well, it's a lack of, it's a bad perception, right? Like I think a lot of forest management companies are doing an impeccable job, but they don't have a good enough or an intricate enough social, public involvement piece that nobody understands what they're doing. And it's so easy to think, oh, the big bad corporations, right? Like, oh, big timber, big pharma, big whatever. Like, it's so easy to do that and to just judge rather than to actually learn and know. But where I think the community forest succeeds is that everything's transparent.
That's right. Yeah.
That's where forest management needs to go, I think.
That's right. We run websites. We hold public meetings. We hold annual meetings. Some community forests have done an incredible job with education and Forestry Week, bringing their citizens and kids into the community, stopping logging, pulling the machines out, getting kids to look at them, teaching them about a mill, that type of thing. Our community forest wants to dive into trying to get into the education system. Can we hold a week of forestry education within the public school system or the education system within British Columbia? We're trying to do that locally. That's our next drive. We feel that people have forgot about forestry. So this is a pivotal time as well. So that's what we want to do. We want to try and get into the school and create a week of forestry working and have students go into the field and understand what we do out there, talk about equipment, hopefully steer some kids into forestry and give them a sense, bring that into their family, if you will, too, through the kids.
Yeah. Because I think most people inherently have that appreciation for nature, right? But they like to look at it and they like to hike through it, and they don't often. I've started to differentiate a little bit between there's folks who like to observe nature, right? They like to see it and observe it, and then there's people who like to incorporate their lives or actually participate in nature, right? The people who are the hunters, the fishers, the foresters, whoever, people who are actually communicating with nature in a way, where you're taking and leaving resources and you're trying to build something with it, right? And I think that's kind of a more, and this is me speaking, so I'm obviously incredibly biased, but I think it's a better way to understand the forest when you're actually, your day-to-day has everything to do with it, right? So I think people have a tendency to believe that foresters are like, oh yeah, like you just love 2x4s or something. I don't know what they believe, but the truth is we got into this because we love the forest and we want to see it sustainable forever. And I think those are values that are they're human values, right? And if you can get the public to understand that, it just makes management so much easier and so much more collaborative and just so much more inclusive.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's key, right? It's, that's, personal drive all the time for me is to clear up those misconceptions as well. Right. And, to be a real working example for the future for community forests, because I believe we will hold tenures longer than large licensees. And we will do different things with those tenures, as in small mills, if that's what supports a community, whatever it might be, putting money into fisheries programs, putting money into growing better trees, understanding the science of growing trees closer to town, dealing with fire interface areas. I think those are the examples that are really hit home with people when we're trying to protect those resources and the things that they value. Protecting trails, protecting green space is super important.
Absolutely.
And that's values that people hold dear to their heart for sure. It's amazing what our surplus profits. We've put almost $2.5 million into seniors housing. Clearwater lacked in seniors housing. There was no place for our old folks to go, but a very small old folks home, if you will. We're on stage 3 now of that. So we're on creating the third set of units, if you will, locally right next to the hospital. So that's where a lot of our profits have gone in, and that has really connected people to what we do and trying to understand what we do. We're not just handing out money here. Who are these guys? What do they do and how does this work?
So where do the profits go? Who's obviously, you know what I mean? You're getting a paycheck and there's a few other people getting paychecks, but where do the profits go from this community forest? How are they distributed so that the community benefits as a whole?
Yeah, great
like
question.
Said.
So surplus profits are generated through logging. Those profits are used for reforestation programs and hydrology and reinvestments. The majority of the surplus profits are held by a society. That society receives applications twice a year for granting. We have two granting cycles. So anybody from the community, any group, can apply through those avenues twice a year. And those, I guess, applications are reviewed by the society, which again represent all members from the community. Everybody from the district to TNRD, citizens at large, recreation groups, they all have a say. I think there's about 8 people on there. So they review all those applications twice a year, and they grant money to those successful people. There's 3 categories there. So
that's awesome. So it's like so one thing was a senior center. What else? Just give me some examples of some other things that are.
So we have a ski hill, the Clearwater Ski Hill. We put a lot of money into Ski Hill, everything from rugs in their lodge to upgrading their kitchen to lift lines, groomers, that type of thing. We have the Outdoor Club. They're the cross-country ski mountain bike trail network. They have received mountains of money to create new trails, upkeep existing trails, support the cross-country skiing. We have put monies, this is pretty amazing, we have put monies into high schools and grade schools. We've bought them sports equipment. We've bought theater equipment. We've bought technical equipment, robots, CNC plasma cutters for their shop. So we put a significant investment into education, straight into the school board.
Yeah.
So we're supplementing that in my mind too. The kids' education in Clearwater is comparable to Kamloops. You know, you hear the principal joking. He's down in Kamloops. The guy's, we got 5 robots for our program. And we're able to say, we have 6 robots because of the community forest, right? It brought and a green screen and whatever else that, you know, you sort of see these larger schools being able to secure. Well, we're able to do that for them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's certainly
awesome. Yeah. Seniors complex, everything from thrift shop roofs, redoing their roof, applying for a senior center, supporting seniors program, the bus that goes to Kamloops so they can go to the museum once a month, these types of things. Investing money into wildfire interface strategies and studies and fuel management. Huge thing.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, it's just incredible that community forest has been able to not only manage the forest, continue to harvest, improve every other value on the landscape at the same time while harvesting, from water values to habitat to recreation to First Nations values, as well as turn a surplus profit and feed all of that money back into a community to raise it up even more. And it's perfect. It's just a perfect system. It sounds awesome. And I'm sure there's problems. I'm sure there's people that have issues with it. I'm not saying it's infallible, but it's definitely inspiring, to say the least.
It is. You know, I wish Ontario would clamp onto the same model, right? It's neat in some countries, let's say like Africa, they've had community forests probably since the dawn of time, right? They recognize the values of working locally and keeping local resources extremely well managed, right? So here we are learning from other countries, really. It's almost a pillar of community forestry.
Yeah. I love it. It's just super exciting. So what are the lessons that you've kind of learned? What advice do you have? You know what? Let's actually, before that, what do the naysayers say? What are the arguments you see against community forests? What are the legitimate things that you see as issues that might prevent these from getting bigger and you know? better.
Yeah. So really, we would love to see the community forest model and additional communities keep getting tenures. But the reality is there's only so much pie left. There's only so much forested ground left adjacent to communities.
Right.
So
especially after the last 4 or 5 summers you guys have had.
Yeah. And I mean, as 8% of our green wood burned up in this timber supply area last summer, those equations get extremely tight. Are they just handing out community forests to whoever? No, not at all. They have to be very diligent in the application, and it has to be with First Nations. There is room for us to grow for sure, but we're at a very hard point. Like I said earlier, we were sort of given the guts and feathers. We were given a 3 watersheds that Weyerhaeuser had been in and Canfor had been in. So we're trying to fit in between what has been logged, and to some people, we are still the same. We are still taking forests out of the forest, the live forest. We're still removing patches. We're still clear cutting. We just have a different hat on.
Oh, right? I see.
So to them, it doesn't matter. You can call yourself First Nations, community forest, woodlot, major tenure. We're all still clear cutting in their mind. Well, there's
are those
the key.
people educated in what's happening, or do you feel that those people are generally just responding to, just reacting to stuff they're seeing with no context?
Yes, I think some of them are reacting to the state British Columbia is in,
of course,
with the overcutting. Absolutely, those are the kind of people that we try and draw in, and we try and provide education to. There will always be people that want to tear you down. So
yeah, and also actually to add to that, how much do you take in their arguments and reflect on them and analyze them yourselves to ensure that their arguments aren't valid?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because that's the number one thing. We want to make sure that if we're going to say, hey, we don't agree with you, you got to make sure that, their arguments don't hold a candle to what you've accomplished.
That's right. And that's the challenge, I would say. There's a lot of bias there about clear cutting, and
of course
it's hard to educate those people that are that far down the line, if you will. But perhaps we have a chance to show them by example.
Yeah. And I think that's, for sure. And the only reason I said that was because I've recorded some episodes in the past where we've talked about educating the public, and I've been cautioned against saying that, because the reality is, sure, the ultimate goal isn't for everyone to have the same values or the same understanding, right? it's not possible. It's not, but what we can do is we can absorb what people are saying, the other values that they're discussing, absorb their concerns, and then really reflect on those concerns, on those issues, and then return to those people with answers and say, listen, I can take you out into the bush and I can show you how this, and this thing that you think that we're doing is not happening. And I can show you how we're building this forest, not depleting it, right? And I think I've started to gear my thought process to that way and saying, okay, so educating the public is not the answer. What the answer is addressing their individual concerns and actually reflecting inwardly on our own biases and own perceptions, and ask ourselves honestly if what they're saying isn't true, and if it's not, then addressing them and showing them that it's not, right?
Absolutely. As a manager, I definitely personally reflect on what they say, and as a check within myself, right? And those opposing viewpoints are fantastic for that reason. Am I doing this right, or am I just running with the same story that community forest is great? We just keep cutting, right?
Right.
So absolutely, it's a check and balance piece. And yes, I have gone back to those hard public people that are ripping me apart at the meeting and asked them to go and look at that creek the next day. And we did do that. What they have issue with is sort of believing in the Forest Act, if you will. Is it really 20 meters that we have to be away from that creek, or should it be 100, right? Those are the kind of things that you just philosophically discuss sometimes with them. And who's kidding who? We've done a lot of cutting in British Columbia. That's what they're seeing out there. So that's where their vision lies.
And fair enough, right? You can't blame them for having
enough.
that perspective. It's
That's
reasonable.
Right. Absolutely, right? And they come from different positions in their background, and that's the cool thing. You listen to that and you take what you can from it. You don't ignore it. But the person that comes back with the same issue over and over, that's a very challenging one. Yeah. And sometimes it takes other members in the public to educate them, not coming from the community forest or a forester's mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's a hard one, right? Because
it is.
Again, we don't want to create a society where everyone has the same values. We want to make sure that everyone's values are protected and that we're doing what is ultimately good and right for all values, right? And I think right. Personally, obviously I'm incredibly biased, but I think from what I've heard and what I've seen from your guys' management plans and that kind of thing, it seems like you guys are doing an incredible job of being honest with yourselves and what has been done in the past and what the future outlook is, and in communicating and collaborating. And I think you guys can hold your head up high and be proud of it and showcase it to the world. And I think it's inevitable that you're always going to have naysayers and people that, have a problem with what we're doing. But I guess, like you said, that's a good opportunity to just check our own bias and relook into those problems and make sure that we're confident and not going down a route where we're just perpetuating the problems of the past, but under a guise of different wording, different terminology.
Yeah, exactly. And and that's really has played out in our community forest. We've had some negative articles posted in the paper by a couple individuals. Literally, it has driven me to we've created now a public interface group. Let's get our website more up to snuff. And yes, I've been fighting this forever. Let's start a Facebook page so we can get positive articles out there and education. You just evolve with the times. People don't go to websites to learn. Well, start a Facebook page then. I'm scared of that because of the barrage of comments and whatnot you can receive. But that seems to be a new method. Well, it has been for a while. So we're going to jump into that. And I'm doing that with a group of people that want to help me in Clearwater. So.
Yeah. Well, I think, of course, you're going to get negative comments, right? And that's okay. Yeah. I think what you can do with those negative comments, though, is you can just respond and say, hey, I would be happy to take you out and show you these issues and show you these concerns and take you out in a larger group, and we can have this discussion. Like, I'm not against defending what we do and showing you what we do, and I'm not closed to other perceptions and other options. But let's, instead of just hating, instead of just pointing a finger and yelling, come to me with your problem, come to me with your issue, and let's work it out.
That's right.
Because I'm sure you have an open door policy, more or less. I'm sure you can't spend all day, every day talking to people, but you got to have, as a community forest operator, you definitely have to make the time for that, right? So I think that's where it's unique, right? Is that you can only get so much hate. Like, how big is Wells Gray? How many people? What's the population?
Yeah, exactly. We have like 5,000 people in the whole surrounding area, if you will. So it's not that big of a population. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So I think you have the means to pull it off, and
that's right.
I think it's just another opportunity to learn. And it's scary though. I feel you. I hate social media stuff. I'm terrible at it because of that same reason, right? But I think it's important.
Yeah, and I, there was a really negative dig, but you know what? We drug some of the critical pieces he was trying to make points of out of there, and and that has driven me to try and improve our website and to improve our public communication. The gentleman's expressing, we still don't understand what you guys are doing. Let's do better. We started last week right away as soon as that hit in the paper. We got to get better here. We got to put more information out here. It's not good enough what we've done. Let's do better. Let's go again. Right. So, yeah.
It's awesome that you have that ability to just turn on a dime and say, okay, let's address this issue. Right.
Yeah.
You can move this ship wherever you want to go. It's not too big to adjust course. I love it.
Exactly. And that brings us right back to, the small farm, how you can manage a smaller tenure in a more meaningful way, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to go in British Columbia with our local resources, is to have them managed by the local citizens, the local towns, First Nations partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what advice would you have for large corporations that are doing forest management? What problems do they have that you see that could be solved with a solution that you've come up with, or another community forest has come up with?
Well, it is all about education, and showing the public that you're managing the forest for other values than just loads to the mill.
Yeah.
So there has to be a certain portion, in my mind, of their education or you can't ignore it any further, or offer that tenure that they have in their hands be managed by community forests. Let us float that boat. Let us do that part for you guys, if you will. It's important that I don't really know what to say there, because I don't.
It's tough. I mean, trying to advise a large corporation, you know what I mean? Like, just I'm sure you see or hear about, some of the issues that happen running a larger company, larger forest management company. And I'm sure you see some solutions within the community forest. And I think it's up to them to come to you and ask and to point that out, right? I mean, otherwise, I don't know if they're going to, I don't know if they're going to have the same perspective as you. I'm not sure.
That's right. And, I've got my bias towards them. I think British Columbia still has cuts set very high, and they're exercising those rights under that cut. Okay. I'm not too sure if that's, are they getting driven by the government, or is the government getting driven by them? I'm not too sure. Right. Mm-hmm. But the public has had enough of everything happening so fast in the background, coupled with wildfires, climate change, flooding. We need to slow down immediately. And you can see by old growth deferral layers coming out, the province is forcing that to happen. We're forcing ourselves into a different regime. I just think the community forests are just that much further along by multiple years, connecting the public, showing the public what we're doing, lowering our cuts if it's required, that type of thing.
Yeah. Just being honest with yourselves and
being honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Being transparent.
That's right. They have shareholders who are accountable to, and their cuts, like I said, have been set the way they're set. They're exercising those rights. Whether the wood's out there or not, that's a different situation. That's where it's a little bit disconnected.
So you think there's assumptions being made, and those assumptions may not be as true as we once suspected.
That's right, and it comes down to data. We have absolutely up to date data for a community forest through LiDAR. The most, recent technology, if you will. The province is still looking and working with veg data, if you will, some pretty basic stuff. Inventory for a small farm is going to be more accurate than the province. The province, I think, is showing it has a whole bunch of wood, but maybe it doesn't. And I don't know. I'm not the professional there. I'm just expressing that because I've discovered that within our community forest.
Yeah, it's a concern you have.
We took the original provincial data and compared it to our set, and it was drastically different, right?
Yeah. And I was honestly, and I don't mean to dig on BC or anybody. I'm just, this is something I'm in the job, like my day job is I'm an inventory forester, right? So I literally do inventories. And the fact that I didn't know that BC didn't have LiDAR. Like Alberta's had LiDAR for 15 years or more, right, I think. Yep. And they're flying, like individual companies are getting their individual FMAs flown, and our inventories go down to ecosite phase level if we want to. That's what we develop ours to. Cool. And so I just assumed the same thing was happening in BC, and I didn't know. I didn't know that things hadn't progressed, because you just hear that, BC is the ultimate in forest management. But I didn't know that there was such a holdup when it came to these new technologies and increasing the amount of data. And like we do things like we use leaf off photography. Like we have a lot of aspen in Alberta, right? So we fly the leaf off so we can see the understory and we can manage for that understory, plan for understory protection and all that stuff. And I just assumed that BC was doing that. And maybe they are in places. Maybe certain companies are doing that. But I just, through the last couple conversations with Gary Merkel, with John Innes and Andy McKinnon, the old growth one I had, I was so caught off guard by the things that they were saying because I just found some of the things to not be true in Alberta. And I didn't realize there was, I'm not saying that Alberta can't learn from community forests because I think they definitely can learn a lot because I don't think we do collaboration well either. But I was just surprised at the inventory thing. And it was just, anyways, that was just something that was on my mind for a while that I think having a good, very detailed, high technology inventory is absolutely crucial to doing good forest management. How could you possibly manage if you don't know what you have?
That's right. And I think we're cheating ourselves a little bit. Our cuts are still set very high as the forest burns up. You know, I'll say again, we lost like 8% of our green wood in our TSA. Well, the cuts are still set at that level. Yeah. I mean, we want to fly to Mars here, but can't we press a button and see what impact that had on our TSA and lower accordingly immediately, right? Yeah. What's we fooling here? We're going to run for another couple of years with the same cut level and catch up eventually. That's really sad, man. So
yeah, and like I can't personally say, and I don't know, I haven't had anybody on that's personally from like a mill in BC, right? So I don't know what's going on with the mills. I hear from people and people that aren't involved, and that's biased. And I'm sure we have our own misconceptions about what's true and what's not, right?
Yeah.
But I think it would be foolish of any mill to assume that they can't learn a whole hell of a lot about collaboration from community forests, and I think every mill needs to dig into that and see what lessons they can learn, because I think the opportunities are endless.
Yes. And I think the government is realizing that, and they're going to turn it around and be in charge of the landscape, if you will, and more direct and not leaving it up to large tenure holders like mills.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's problematic in and of itself as well, right? That can create its own issues. It's not like that's a better system or anything. It's just a different one.
It's a different system. Exactly.
Yeah.
The province, needs to make some significant investment in inventory. That's where I do look at aspects of Alberta, and I think you guys are ahead of us, man, in that regard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because
we got smaller trees though, so it's not real forest, right?
That's right. We just have so much, right? I think that's been the attitude. It's just so much here that we're finally sort of catching up to. Not to the end, but to where we see, hey, we're getting limited here, so we need to start changing.
Well, and forestry in Alberta has been privileged in that we're not the main industry. Right. Exactly. Oil and gas is the culture of Alberta, and forestry is the culture of BC. And I think because of that, BC's been under a lot more fire than the forest industry in Alberta, just because we're not at the forefront. Most people in Alberta don't think about forestry. It's not on their mind. Yeah. Never has been, and probably won't ever will be. But BC has a lot more public pressure and a lot more onus on corporations to be more transparent. And I think that's they got to catch up for sure. Definitely.
That's right. It's interesting with the pipeline coming through Clearwater. This has really made me realize people have forgot about forestry right now. Absolutely, they have. Everybody's holding a sign. Everybody's working. All the forestry equipment, it's gone. It's on the pipeline. Mm-hmm. When that clears, people might come back. But, it's interesting. That's the driver, if you will, economically. Yeah. As forestry starts, tipping off here a little bit, decreasing. Who's kidding who? Where forestry is on the decline as far as volumes and large cut eras.
And I think that's inevitable. I think
it's a natural progression, right?
Exactly. Unless you can prove through better data, specific data, that there's actually more growing out there, then I think that it's inevitable that you're going to have this happen, right? You're going to have a reduced in cut, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I think forestry's around to stay. It's just a matter of at what scale and what level and how much collaboration and public involvement is there going to be, and that the onus is on the corporations to jump ahead, and a lot of corporations are. At least I know in Alberta, there's a lot of companies that are doing the hard work and putting in the big money to do this the right way. And I'm sure that the same is true in BC. But I think everybody's got to get on board, right? It's time.
Yeah. I mean, community forests aren't going to ever take control of British Columbia. We're not saying that. We're just saying that we have a role close to communities that's very important and is the way of the future. That's critical to recognize that we don't all have to do it the same. Yeah. Absolutely. There's definitely industrial models that work well and support the province's big coffers, but we want to do it differently for our little towns. So
I love it, man.
Yeah.
I love it. It's just exciting stuff. This was
it is. It's awesome.
This is a great conversation. I'm glad we got to speak, and I'm excited to in the next little while keep in contact with you, and maybe try and get in touch with some other community forests that you think are doing something pretty special that maybe I can record with them and dive into the specifics around what they're doing, right? Especially around, I think the First Nations involvement is a big one, right? So I look forward to that, man.
I want to do that. I want to hook you up with a couple of First Nations owned community forests. Incredible where they're going with old growth management and concepts like that for the future, right? So
let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. They're working with 7-generation model. What we do now, we study or look at what impacts it will have for 7 generations. That's incredible. And that's where we need to go. We'll be learning a lot from them. Absolutely. So we have to hook you up there with those dudes for sure. Yeah,
please do. I look forward to it. So any final words, any words of advice, any words of wisdom, any interesting jokes, anything you want to finish with before we call it a day?
I would just say that British Columbia is at a very pivotal point here. With fire management and reduction in timber supply. It's my vision that other communities will be able to have community forest tenures with First Nations partnerships, manage those tenures toward, as their values, and show us, the province, how we can do things differently, how we can really, for real, sustainably manage things by lowering our cuts, by ensuring we're not, having a very strict rate of cut in watersheds and whatnot. We can really do forest management, not just talk about it, and not just fit in between the rules. I would like to think that we are actually creating a new way of doing business, right? And First Nations and communities are leading the way. I think that's incredible joint partnerships. And it makes very, very big gains on reconciliation, actually having our communities working together. Incredible what we'll solve together, I think.
Thanks so much, man. That was excellent. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you loved that as much as I did. It was cool to get George's perspective on things and kind of the issues that he's seen come up and how he sees things coming about in the future, how maybe we can scale this up, right? It was cool. So if you guys have any questions for myself or for George, feel free to reach out, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, and I will definitely get back to you. And make sure to tell your friends, share it on social media, all that good stuff. It's free content. So the least you could do is hook me up with a like or a review, or tell somebody about it. That's all I ask. All right. Okay. We'll catch you folks in a few weeks. Thanks for listening. Take it easy.